Imagine you are standing on a windswept limestone ridge in what is now the Dordogne region of southwestern France. It is roughly 28,000 years ago, the height of the last glacial maximum. The air is so cold it feels like it's trying to shatter your teeth, and the sun is a pale, weak disk hanging low over a landscape of permafrost and stunted scrub. You are crouched inside a rock shelter, and in your arms you are holding a 3-month-old infant. This child is, by any objective biological standard, a complete catastrophe. It cannot walk, it cannot find its own food, it cannot even hold its own head up. Its skin is thin, it has no fur, and its only method of communication is a high-pitched wail that in a world filled with cave lions and hyenas sounds like a dinner bell. And trust me, the hyenas were listening. If you were any other mammal, this level of helplessness would be an evolutionary dead end. Yet, here you are, and here the child is, surviving in a world that wants to freeze it or eat it before sunset. This is the great paradox of our species. We are born more vulnerable than almost any other creature on Earth, yet we manage to raise enough of these fragile beings to take over the entire planet. We like to think it was our tools or our fire that kept them alive, but the truth is much stranger and far more sophisticated. It wasn't just survival, it was a high-stakes neurological gamble that should have failed. And yet the fact that you're watching this means the gamble paid off. We often fall into the trap of thinking ancient humans were either brutal savages who barely cared for their young, or noble savages who lived in a perfect natural harmony. Both are wrong. In fact, they're dangerously wrong. The reality is that keeping a child alive in the Pleistocene was a feat of social engineering so complex it would make a modern hospital look disorganized. The common myth is that it was just a mother and a child against the world, a lonely struggle in a dark cave, but that's a fairy tale. If an ancient mother had tried to do it alone, her child would have been dead within a week, and she wouldn't have been far behind. The math of the ancient world simply didn't allow for the nuclear family. We've been told for decades that the caveman father went out to hunt while the mother stayed back to nurture, but the archaeological record is starting to paint a much more chaotic and cooperative picture. It wasn't a private affair. It was a public project. We need to dismantle the idea that survival was about individual strength and start looking at it as a form of collective intelligence. Because if it were just about strength, we would have been wiped out by the first cold snap. The real question isn't how they survived the lions, but how they survived each other's exhaustion. And the answer starts with a biological glitch that we've turned into our greatest strength. To understand how they kept kids alive, we first have to ask why they were so hard to keep alive in the first place. And the answer, as it usually does with humans, comes down to our enormous heads. There is a concept in evolutionary biology known as the egg, the energetics of gestation and growth. For years, scientists like Holly Dunsworth at the University of Rhode Island have challenged the old obstetric dilemma theory. The old idea was that babies are born helpless because their heads have to get out before the mother's hips get too wide for her to walk. But Dunsworth's research suggests something even more fascinating. It's not just about the birth canal, it's about the mother's metabolism. By 9 months, a human fetus is demanding so much energy that the mother literally cannot keep up. She reaches a metabolic ceiling. To keep the baby inside any longer would be to starve them both. So we give birth to what are essentially extramural fetuses. A human baby is born about 9 to 12 months too early compared to other primates. They are neurologically unfinished. This is why a baby horse can run within hours, but a human baby takes a year just to stand up. It's also why they're so incredibly annoying at 3 a.m. This secondary ultrashality meant that ancient humans weren't just raising infants, they were essentially managing an external pregnancy for an entire year. This created a massive risk. A helpless baby is a stationary target. Why didn't this vulnerability lead to our extinction? The answer lies in something called alloparenting, a term popularized by the renowned anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy. In her landmark work, she argues that humans are cooperative breeders. Unlike our great ape cousins, where mothers are often fiercely protective and rarely let anyone else touch their infants, ancient humans were surprisingly chill about passing the baby around. Assuming chill can describe someone living in a world with giant short-faced bears. This wasn't just a nice social gesture, it was a biological necessity. Hrdy's research into modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Efi of the Ituri forest provides a window into the past. Among the Efe, an infant is handled by an average of 14 different people in their first few days of life. They are passed from aunts to grandmothers, to older siblings to unrelated campmates. This distributed the care load. It meant that if a mother was exhausted or needed to forage, the child's survival didn't drop to zero. It also meant the child was being exposed to a wider variety of immune system cues and social signals from birth. But this raises a terrifying question. In a world of scarce resources and constant movement, why would anyone who wasn't the parent invest so much energy in a child that wasn't theirs? Why didn't the group just leave the weakest behind when the food ran out? The mystery deepens when you look at the grandmother hypothesis, first proposed by Kristen Hawkes after observing the Hadza people in Tanzania. She noticed that older women, past their reproductive years, were the most productive foragers in the group. They weren't just retired, they were the economic engine of the tribe. By providing surplus calories to their grandchildren, these women allowed the mothers to have their next baby sooner. This is a massive evolutionary anomaly. Almost no other animal lives long past menopause. We do because a grandmother's presence is a literal life insurance policy for an infant. Think of them as the original supercomputers of survival. Hawkes' data showed that a child's chance of survival increased dramatically when a maternal grandmother was present. This created a feedback loop. Better care led to bigger brains, and bigger brains led to even more complex social structures to care for those brains. It was a virtuous cycle of dependency, but while grandmothers were providing the calories, the physical environment of the infant was still a nightmare of predators and pathogens. How did they handle the literal physical reality of a screaming baby in a landscape where silence was often the only thing keeping you off the menu? This is where we have to look at the sensory world of the Pleistocene infant. In 2017, a team of researchers led by Sahra Talamo at the Max Planck Institute used carbon dating on a tiny tooth found in a Bulgarian cave. It belonged to an infant who lived 45,000 years ago. Isotopic analysis of such teeth reveals a surprising truth. Ancient infants were almost certainly carried 24/7. They had to be. If you put a baby down in the Paleolithic, you were either inviting a predator or risking lethal hypothermia. The ground is a cold, dangerous place when you don't have a floor. This constant physical contact, what we now call baby wearing, wasn't a choice. It was the baseline of existence. Scientists have found that this constant vestibular stimulation, the rhythmic rocking of a walking adult, actually regulates an infant's heart rate and breathing. It also keeps them quiet. A baby being carried is a baby that feels safe. This leads to an uncomfortable realization. Our modern habit of putting babies in cribs or strollers is, in evolutionary terms, a form of sensory deprivation. Ancient babies didn't have nurseries. They had heartbeats. They lived their entire early lives pressed against the skin of a rotating cast of caregivers. This created a calm response that was vital for stealth. But what about the nights? In a dark, freezing cave, how did they ensure the baby didn't just stop breathing in the middle of the night? The science of ancestral sleep is where modern parenting advice and ancient reality clash most violently. And usually the ancient reality is the one with more evidence behind it. James McKenna, the founder of the Mother-Baby Behavioral Sleep Laboratory at Notre Dame, has spent his career studying co-sleeping. He found that when a mother and infant sleep together, their carbon dioxide levels, heart rates, and even brain waves begin to synchronize. This is called breat feeding, or breathing synchrony. The mother's breathing actually acts as a pacer for the infant's still developing respiratory system. In the ancient world, sleeping alone wasn't just scary, it was biologically wrong. An infant left to sleep in a separate area, if such a thing even existed, would have been at a much higher risk of SIDS, as their brain might forget to trigger a breath during deep sleep without the nearby rustle and CO2 cues of an adult. The ancient solution to nighttime survival was radical proximity. They slept in huddles. This kept the baby warm, it kept the baby breathing, and it allowed for on-demand nursing that happened dozens of times a night without the mother ever fully waking up. It was a low-energy, high-safety system that we have almost entirely abandoned. But as efficient as the sleep was, the food was a different story. Eventually, milk isn't enough. And in a world without blenders or soft mush, how did an 8-month-old eat a piece of tough reindeer meat? The answer is as effective as it is gross to our modern sensibilities. Pre-mastication. Yes, we're talking about mama birding. Before the invention of pottery and boiling, humans couldn't make porridge. To transition a child to solids, adults would chew the food first, breaking down the tough proteins and fibers with their own teeth and, crucially, their own saliva. This wasn't just about mechanical breakdown. Saliva contains enzymes like amylase that begin the digestive process, and it also transfers the adult's oral microbiome to the child. This was the original vaccine. By sharing chewed food, the caregivers were seeding the infant's gut with the bacteria needed to fight off local pathogens. This practice is documented in almost every traditional society studied by anthropologists, from the Arctic to the Amazon. It was a bridge between the sterile world of milk and the chaotic world of the environment. And honestly, it worked better than a plastic pouch of pureed peas. But even with pre-chewed meat and grandmother's berries, the mortality rate was still terrifying. Some estimates suggest 40% of children didn't make it to age 5. This led ancient humans to develop something even more powerful than food: ritual and medicinal knowledge. We often assume ancient people were helpless against disease, but the archaeological record says otherwise. In the School Cave in Israel, researchers found the 100,000-year-old grave of a child buried with the mandible of a wild boar in its arms. This wasn't just a body thrown in a hole. It was a ritual. They cared, they mourned, and they fought back with a sophisticated Pleistocene pharmacy. We have evidence of ancient humans using willow bark, the precursor to aspirin, to treat fevers in children as far back as 50,000 years ago. In the Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthal burials, our close cousins who faced the same challenges, were found with pollen from yarrow, cornflower, and mallow, plants known even today for their medicinal properties. They were using the landscape as a medicine cabinet. They weren't just watching their children die, they were experimenting with pharmacology. They were using honey for its antiseptic properties on umbilical stumps, and using specific clays to treat infant diarrhea. They were the first pediatricians, operating with a trial-and-error database that spanned tens of thousands of years. But there is one final piece of the puzzle, a secret weapon that most people completely overlook when they think about ancient survival. It's the sibling strategy. In modern Western society, we think of children as a cost. In the ancient world, they were part of the crew. As soon as a child could walk, they were integrated into the caretaking system. Older siblings, particularly girls, but also boys, were all mothers in training. In the Hadza and Kung societies, 5-year-olds are often responsible for watching 3-year-olds. Which sounds like a recipe for disaster, but bear with me. This early responsibility did two things. It freed up the adults to do the heavy lifting of survival, and it pre-trained the next generation in the high-stakes art of keeping a human alive. This was a social insurance policy. If a mother died, a common occurrence in the ancient world, the child wasn't left with an inexperienced father. They were already embedded in a web of siblings and cousins who knew exactly how to soothe, carry, and feed them. This horizontal transfer of knowledge was just as important as the vertical transfer from parents. It meant that the manual for human survival wasn't written down. It was lived every day by every member of the group. But now we reach the biggest reveal of all, the one that reframes everything we think we know about our own success. For a long time, we thought Homo sapiens outcompeted Neanderthals because we were smarter or had better spears. But a growing number of researchers like Penelope Spikins at the University of York believe our secret weapon was actually our collaborative childhood. Neanderthals seem to have had a slightly faster growth rate. Their children became adults sooner. On the surface, that sounds like an advantage. You get more hunters faster. But humans did the opposite. We slowed down. We extended childhood. We made our kids stay useless for longer. Why? Because a longer childhood allowed for a longer period of brain plasticity. By keeping our kids dependent on a massive social network for 15 years instead of 10, we gave them more time to learn the complex social rules, language, and tool-making skills that define our species. Our vulnerability was our training ground. We didn't keep kids alive, despite their helplessness. We thrived, because their helplessness forced us to become the most cooperative, communicative, and empathetic animals on the planet. Our social structures didn't evolve to support our big brains. Our big brains evolved to navigate the social structures required to keep a baby alive. The child wasn't just the beneficiary of the village. The child was the architect of the village. Wait, let's look at the dark side of this for a moment. Because as beautiful as this cooperation sounds, it came with a brutal, cold-blooded necessity. In a world where the group's survival was balanced on a knife edge, the investment in a child was a calculated risk. There is evidence of infanticide in the ancient world, usually in cases of twins, where a mother couldn't physically carry or feed both. It's a hard truth to swallow, but the Pleistocene didn't have a safety net. These choices, as horrifying as they are to us, were made to ensure the survival of the other children, and the group as a whole. The ancient world was a place of extreme parental investment theory in action. They didn't just love their children, they budgeted them. This makes the survivability of the Upward Sun River infants in Alaska, 2 babies buried 11,500 years ago with elaborate grave goods, even more poignant. One was a late-term fetus, the other a 6-week-old infant. The fact that they were buried together with such care, even in a time of extreme environmental stress, shows that the emotional bond was a powerful driving force. They weren't just units of production, they were loved, and that love was the glue that made the whole impossible system work. As a quick aside, it's worth noting that the alloparenting system even extended across species. There is a theory that the first dogs weren't just hunting partners, but nanny aids. A domesticated wolf or early dog could act as an early warning system for a sleeping camp, allowing the tired parents to sleep more deeply. They could also provide warmth, The phrase three-dog night isn't just a saying, it's a survival strategy. By bringing animals into the care web, ancient humans further diversified their life support system. This is the ultimate wow fact of our history. We didn't just use our environment, we socialized it. We turned grandmothers, siblings, neighbors, and even wolves into a massive interlocking shield that protected the most fragile thing in the universe, a human newborn. This wasn't a primitive way to live. It was a peak efficiency social technology that we have spent the last 200 years dismantling in favor of the isolated nuclear family. So why didn't the wolves or the cold or the hunger kill you? Because for 300,000 years, your ancestors participated in a relay race where the baton was a screaming, helpless infant. Every single person in your direct lineage, going back to the first asterisk Homo sapiens asterisk, was the beneficiary of a grandmother who foraged extra tubers, a sibling who carried them until their back ached, and a community that agreed implicitly that a child's life was a shared responsibility. They survived because they were never, not for 1 second, alone. The cold open paradox we started with, the impossible survival of the most vulnerable creature, is solved not by fire or stone, but by us. We are the species that learned how to share the burden of exhaustion. But that leads to a final haunting thought as we look at our modern world of sleep training and isolated nurseries. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Have we actually improved the situation? Or have we just traded one set of risks for another? We've traded the cave lion for the lonely mother syndrome. We've traded the cold for the burnout of the two-parent household. Ancient humans kept their kids alive by refusing to believe in the individual. They understood that a human child is a communal being. When we look back at that mother in the French cave 28,000 years ago, we shouldn't pity her. She had a support system that most modern parents would kill for. She had a world that was physically dangerous but socially thick. We have a world that is physically safe but socially thin. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all for a creature that evolved to be raised by a village. Think back to that Ice Age ridge, the one where the wind was trying to stop your heart. The only reason that mother and child survived the night was the warmth of the bodies around them. That is the fundamental truth of our species. We are not self-made. We are other-made. It's a simple fact, but it shatters the modern myth of independence. Every time you feel like you have to do it all yourself, you are fighting against 300,000 years of biological hardwiring. Ancient humans didn't keep kids alive by being strong enough to do it alone. They were smart enough to realize they couldn't. They embraced the vulnerability and built a world around it. And here is the cold, undeniable fact that should make you look at your own life differently. Your survival was never a guarantee. It was a gift from a chain of people who were often hungry, always tired, and perpetually terrified, yet they never once put the baby down. You are the end result of a 300,000-year-long game of don't let the baby touch the ground. If even one of them had decided it was too much work to help their neighbor, or that they didn't owe anything to a child that wasn't theirs, your entire line of existence would have vanished into the permafrost. You exist because independence is a lie we invented very recently. Does that make you feel safe, or does it make you realize how thin the ice you're standing on really is? If you found this dive into our ancestral care web as fascinating as I did, consider subscribing to join us for more deep dives into the hidden mechanics of being human. We're all in this village together, after all. What's one part of the ancient care load you wish we still had today? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next rabbit hole.